The first stage that occurs in the sexual reproduction of plants is pollination. Pollination, the transfer of male reproductive cells to female reproductive cells, need to first occur so that fertilization, seed dispersal, and germination can follow suit. An ovary contains female reproductive cells. The female part of the flower is the pistil, which is made up of the style, stigma, and ovary. The ovary may contain one or more ovules. The ovule contains female reproductive cells which can develop into seeds. Which of the following parts of a flower produces pollen? The anther of a flower produces pollen. The male part of a flower is known as the stamen. It is made up of the anther and the filament. The filament is a thin stalk that supports the anther. At the tip of the thin filament is the anther. Pollen sacs containing pollen grains, the male reproductive cells, are produced in the anther. Cross-pollination is the process when the pollen of a flower from plant A is transferred to the stigma of a flower from plant B of the same species. Cross-pollination is a process that happens between flowers from different parts of the same species. Coconuts have fibrous husks that trap air in it. These fibrous husks keep the coconuts afloat as the current of water carries them away from the parent plant over long distances. Plants start to make their own food at the seedling stage. When a seed germinates, its roots first appear. The seed obtains its food from the seed leaves. Then, the shoot grows. The true leaves appear and grow upwards towards sunlight. Once true leaves develop, the seedling can make its own food via photosynthesis. The correct order of reproduction in a flowering plant is pollination, fertilization, seed dispersal, and germination. First, pollination takes place where pollen from the anther reaches the stigma of the same or another flower of the same species. Then, the pollen travels down the pollen tube and reaches the ovule. It fuses with the egg cell. This is known as fertilization. Fertilization results in the formation of seeds. Seeds are then dispersed by various means. This is known as seed dispersal. Under appropriate conditions, seeds start to grow. This process is known as germination. The stigma is not a male part of a flower. Female parts of a flower are the stigma, style, and ovary, while the male parts of a flower are the anther and filament. Pollen is the male reproductive cell. Lotus, pong-pong, and sago palm are fruits dispersed by water. Which of the following parts of a flower is directly involved in fertilization? The ovule of a flower is directly involved in fertilization. The ovule contains female reproductive cells which are directly involved in fertilization. What is pollination? Pollination is the transfer of pollens from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or different flowers of the same species. Draw and label a diagram to show the stages of seed germination. Stage 1, roots emerging. Stage 2, seed coat splitting. Stage 3, shoots. List 3 characteristics of fruits dispersed by wind. Fruits and seeds dispersed by wind are light and dry. They may also have thin papery structures, like wings or parachutes, woolly hairs, or plumes that help the seed to catch the wind, so that they can be carried over long distances. Identify the method of seed dispersal for each of the following plants. Durian by animals. Balsam by splitting of the fruit. Describe the functions of the anther and stigma in a flowering plant. Anther. The anther contains pollen sacs. The pollen sacs contain pollens, the male reproductive cells. When the anther is ripe, it splits to release an abundance of pollens. Stigma. The stigma is the female part of the flower that sticks out from the style so that pollens can land on it and travel down the style to the ovary for fertilization. How does fertilization occur in flowering plants? When pollen lands on a stigma, it produces a tiny tube that grows into the stigma and down the style to the ovule. The pollen then enters the ovule and the nucleus of the male sex cell fuses with the nucleus of the female sex cell in the ovule. This process is known as fertilization. Darren carried out an experiment to find out if fertilization can occur between flowers of different species. He used 5 flowers, each from a different species. He transferred pollen grains from a flower of one species to the stigma of a flower of another species. How many flowers will be fertilized? No flowers will be fertilized. The male reproductive cell of a species cannot fertilize the egg cell of another species. Which species of flowers are insect-pollinated? All 5 species have big petals. Insect-pollinated flowers usually have big petals. The following are steps in the reproduction of flowering plants. Pollen grains land on the stigma. Each pollen grain produces a pollen tube which grows down the style to the ovary. The pollen tube enters the ovule that contains an egg cell. The male reproductive cells in the pollen tube fuses with the egg cell. The female parts of a flower are made of 3 parts: stigma, style, and ovary. The style holds the stigma at the tip. It leads down to the ovary that contains the ovules. Xavier wanted to find out how the structure of a fruit affects the time it stays in the air. He labeled 4 fruits W, X, Y, and Z. He removed a wing from fruit X, 2 wings from fruit Y, and 3 wings from fruit Z. He then dropped fruits W, X, Y, and Z from a height. Which of the following would ensure a fair test? All the fruits should be dropped from the same height. All the fruits should be of a similar size and weight. The aim of the experiment is to find out how the structure of a fruit affects the time it stays in the air. Only the number of wings of the fruits should vary. All the other variables should remain the same. Xavier measured the time taken for each fruit to reach the ground. He recorded them in a table, as shown below. Which one of the following correctly indicates the time taken by fruits W, X, Y, and Z to reach the ground. The wing-like structure of a fruit helps it to stay longer in the air. Fruit W will stay in the air the longest as its wings were not removed. Xavier pasted 2 more wings on fruit W. He then dropped it from the same height. Which one of the following would likely be the time that fruit W stayed in the air after Xavier pasted more wings on it? From the question above, we know that fruit W stayed in the air for 5.1 seconds. With more wings, fruit W will stay in the air for a longer time. John wanted to find out if water is needed for the germination of seeds. He prepared setups A, B, C and D as described below and buried 2 seeds in each setup. Which 2 setups should he use to carry out the experiment? The aim of the experiment is to find out if water is needed for the germination of seeds. The variable to be changed is the presence of water in the soil. All the other variables should be kept the same. Setups C and D are not used as warmth is usually needed for the germination of seeds. In which setup will the seeds germinate? Seeds in setup B have water and warmth, which are needed for the germination of seeds. Rubber seeds and broadleaf mahogany seeds are dispersed through the splitting action of the fruits. The table below shows the average mass of each kind of seeds. It is observed that broadleaf mahogany seeds are dispersed further from their parent plants than rubber seeds. Which of the following are likely reasons for the above observation? The broadleaf mahogany seeds are lighter than the rubber seeds. The broadleaf mahogany seeds have a wing-like structure, while the rubber seeds do not. The average mass of a rubber seed is approximately 10 times that of a broadleaf mahogany seed. The wing-like structure of the broadleaf mahogany seeds helps them stay in the air longer. The broadleaf mahogany seeds are light and have a wing-like structure. Hence, they can be carried away from the parent plants by wind after the fruits split open. The diagram below shows the stages of a seed germinating and growing into an adult plant. Which of the following statements are correct? Water is needed for all the stages of growth. Pollination and fertilization have to take place in order for stage 6 to happen. The plant can make its own food only when the first leaves of the shoot are developed. A seed needs air, water, and the right temperature to germinate. Su Ming prepared the following setups to find out if the dispersal of seeds reduces competition among plants. She selected some seeds from a species of plant to be used for the experiment. Her sister told her that her setups would not produce accurate results. Which of the following explains why? If the pots are of different sizes, they should contain the same number of seeds. The variable to be changed could be the size of the pots, with the number of seeds in each pot being the same. Alternatively, the number of seeds could be the variable to be changed with the size of the pot being the same. Charles was walking along the street when he saw a seed pod on the ground with seeds scattered around it. Which of the following methods of dispersal had taken place? Splitting action and wind dispersal. A seed pod splits open when it is ripe and shoots out its seeds. Since the seeds are light and have a wing-like structure, they will be carried by wind. Seed dispersal reduces competition for sunlight, minerals and water between parent plants and young plants. Air is found abundantly in the surroundings, and plants make their own food, so they do not compete for air and food. Wei Ming knows that he can grow durian trees from seeds. He wants to find out if a seed will germinate after it is boiled in water. He prepares 2 setups, as shown below. He then places them at a place with sufficient air and the right temperature. He also gives them water. What is the purpose of Setup B? Setup B serves as a control. In which setup will the seed germinate after a week? Explain why. Setup B. It is because the seed has not been boiled and is still alive. Wei Ming wants to find out if a durian seed needs warmth to germinate. Describe 2 changes he should make to the setups to carry out the experiment. He should use an unboiled seed for both setups. He should place one setup in a cold place, such as a freezer, and the other setup in a warm place, such as a garden. James was given lime water, which would change in appearance from clear to cloudy in the presence of carbon dioxide, a gas. He prepared a sealed setup as shown below. 2 days later, the seeds germinated and the lime water appeared cloudy. What could James conclude from the experiment? Explain your answer. When seeds germinate, they produce carbon dioxide. The lime water turned cloudy after 2 days when the seeds germinated. John grew many balsam seeds in a pot. After a few days, most of the seeds had germinated. However, some seeds did not germinate even after 2 weeks. John concluded that there was insufficient light. Why is John's conclusion wrong? Light is not needed for the germination of seeds. What is the likely reason that some of the seeds did not germinate? The seeds that did not germinate were dead. The diagrams below show 2 different flowers. How is flower likely pollinated? Explain your answer. It is pollinated by wind. The anthers dangle out to release pollen into the air dot. The stigmas are large and feathery, and hang outside the flower to catch the pollen drifting in the air. How is flower bee likely pollinated? Explain your answer. It is pollinated by insects. The anthers are inside the flower so that insects can brush against them. The stigma is also inside the flower so that it can brush against insects. Flowers pollinated by insects often have a sweet scent and contain nectar. Explain why. It is to attract insects to the flowers to help pollinate them. Ben studies two flowers of the same species carefully. He realizes that the female and male parts are on different flowers that come from separate plants. He concludes that egg cells of this species of flowers will never be fertilized. Why is Ben's conclusion wrong? The egg cells can still be fertilized as there are male and female parts, although they are found on different flowers of the same species. Explain how fertilization for this species can take place. The egg cells of the female flowers can be fertilized after the pollen grains from the male flowers are transferred to the stigma of the female flowers. Jean put some soil in a container with 3 compartments. She put 2 seeds in each compartment and covered each compartment with a material as shown below. She placed the container under the sun and watered the seeds daily. What was the aim of the experiment? To find out if seeds need light to germinate. Other than ensuring that it was a fair test, state another reason why. For a better chance that at least one of the seeds would germinate. In which compartment will the seeds germinate? Give a reason for your answer. In all 3 compartments. Seeds do not need light to germinate. The male parts of the flower are filament and anther. Together they form the stamen. The female parts of the flower are style, ovary, ovules, and stigma. Together they form the pistil. The stamen is the male reproductive part of the flower. It consists of an anther and a filament. The anther produces pollen grains, while the filament holds the anther in a suitable position to disperse the pollen grains. The carpel is the female reproductive part of the flower. It consists of an ovary, a style, and 1 or more stigmas. The ovary produces and protects the ovules and the stigma receives pollen grains. The style connects them together. What is pollination? Pollination is the transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma. A plant has flowers that have both the male and female reproductive parts. Its anthers and stigmas mature at different times. Which type of pollination are the plant's flowers better adapted for? Cross-pollination. The plant's flowers are better adapted for cross-pollination. Although all of the plant's flowers have both male and female reproductive parts, self-pollination would not be possible because the anthers and stigmas both mature at different times. Where are the anthers of flowers adapted for self-pollinated most likely to be located? On the same flower, above the stigma. For self-pollination to occur, the anther and stigma would need to be located near one another on the same flower or on different flowers of the same plant. Self-pollination has a higher chance of occurring when the anther is above the stigma, allowing pollen grains to fall off and land on the stigma easily. Based on the features of the flower below, Which method of pollination is it better adapted for? Wind pollination. The flower has large, feathery stigmas and long, pendulous stamens that protrude out of the flower. Its petals are also small and dull-colored. Hence, it is adapted for wind pollination. Which show the process of pollination. Pollination occurs when pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma, which is not a feature of an insect-pollinated flower. Large and feathery stigma. The stigma of an insect-pollinated flower is usually small, enclosed within a flower and sticky, which is a feature of an insect-pollinated flower. Stamen enclosed within the flower. Large, colorful petals. Nectar present. Scent present. Which statements explains how the structure of a wind-pollinated flower is related to its function. Stigma are large and feathery to trap pollen grains in the air. The stigma must have a large surface area to trap as many pollen grains as possible, as pollen grains in the wind are not transferred to flowers directly. Filaments are long and pendulous to allow anthers to protrude outside the flower for pollen grains to be easily released into the wind. Having long and pendulous filaments help to facilitate the transfer of pollen grains when wind blows. Pollen grains have smooth surfaces and are small and light to be carried by wind easily. When pollen grains have smooth surfaces and are small and light, they can be easily blown and carried by wind. Karen observed two different flowers, Y and Z, as shown below. She noticed that flower Y is sweet-smelling and brightly colored, while flower Z has no smell and is dull in color. Based on her observations above, state how flower Y and flower Z are pollinated. Flower Z is pollinated by wind. The anthers dangle out to release pollen into the air. The stigmas are large and feathery, and hang outside the flower to catch the pollen drifting in the air. Flower Y is pollinated by insects. The anthers are inside the flower so that insects can brush against them. The stigma is also inside the flower so that it can brush against insects. Which of the following is the first sign of germination? The seed absorbs water and swells. A seed requires three conditions for germination. The conditions are water, oxygen, and warmth, temperature. The following is the correct sequence during germination of seeds. 1. The seed absorbs water and swells. 2. The roots appear. 3. The shoots appear. 4. The first leaves appear to make food. A plant has flowers that have both the male and female reproductive parts. Its anthers and stigmas mature at different times. Which type of pollination are the plant's flowers better adapted for? Cross-pollination. The plant's flowers are better adapted for cross-pollination. Although all of the plant's flowers have both male and female reproductive parts, self-pollination would not be possible because the anthers and stigmas both mature at different times. Where are the anthers of flowers adapted for self-pollinated most likely to be located? On the same flower, above the stigma. For self-pollination to occur, the anther and stigma would need to be located near one another, on the same flower or on different flowers of the same plant. Self-pollination has a higher chance of occurring when the anther is above the stigma, allowing pollen grains to fall off and land on the stigma easily. Based on the features of the flower below, which method of pollination is it better adapted for? Wind pollination. The flower has large, feathery stigmas and long, pendulous stamens that protrude out of the flower. Its petals are also small and dull-colored. Hence, it is adapted for wind pollination. The adaptations of flowers to the type of pollination. Petals. Insect pollination, large and brightly colored. Wind pollination, small and dull-colored. Stigmas. Insect pollination, small, compact and enclosed within flower. Wind pollination, large, feathery and protruding out of flower. Stamens. Insect pollination, non-pendulous and enclosed within flower. Wind pollination, long, pendulous and protruding out of flower. Nectar and nectar guide. Insect pollination, present. Wind pollination, absent. Scent. Insect pollination, fragrant. Wind pollination, odorless. Pollen grains. Insect pollination, large with rough surfaces. Wind pollination, small and light with smooth surfaces. The diagram below shows two flowers of the same type. Which of the two arrows show the process of pollination? B and D. Pollination occurs when pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma, which is not a feature of an insect-pollinated flower. Large and feathery stigma. The stigma of an insect-pollinated flower is usually small, enclosed within a flower and sticky. Which statements explains how the structure of a wind-pollinated flower is related to its function? Stigma are large and feathery to trap pollen grains in the air. The stigma must have a large surface area to trap as many pollen grains as possible, as pollen grains in the wind are not transferred to flowers directly. Filaments are long and pendulous to allow anthers to protrude outside the flower for pollen grains to be easily released into the wind. Having long and pendulous filaments help to facilitate the transfer of pollen grains when wind blows. Pollen grains have smooth surfaces and are small and light to be carried by wind easily. When pollen grains have smooth surfaces and are small and light, they can be easily blown and carried by wind. Karen observed two different flowers, Y and Z, as shown below. She noticed that flower Y is sweet-smelling and brightly colored, while flower Z has no smell and is dull in color. Based on her observations above, state how flower Y and flower Z are pollinated. Flower Y is most likely animal pollinated. Flower Z is most likely wind pollinated. Flower Y is sweet-smelling and brightly colored, while flower Z has no smell and is dull-colored. For wind-pollinated flowers, the anther is found hanging outside by the flower, and the stigma is also found hanging outside the flower so that they are more exposed to the wind. The anther produces many pollen grains to increase the chances of pollination taking place. The pollen grains are small and light so that they can be easily carried away by the wind. The stigmas are large and feathery to act like a net to trap pollen grains. Fertilization is the fusion of the male reproductive cell with the egg cell. After fertilization, the ovary becomes a fruit and the ovule becomes a seed. After fertilization, ovary to fruit, ovule to seed. After fertilization, the petals shrivel and drop off. Andrew took 4 flowers, A, B, C and D, from the same plant and removed some parts from each flower. In which 2 flowers can fertilization occur? Fertilization occurs in flowers C and D when a male reproductive cell fuses with an egg cell in an ovule. Young plants are found away from the parent plant. Plants disperse their seeds to increase the chances of survival for their young. How does the dispersal of seeds increase the chance of survival? Seed dispersal reduces competition and allows young plants to obtain sufficient nutrients, space, light and water. Light from the sun is blocked by taller plants, causing shorter plants to receive less light to make food. Growing further from one another allows young plants to obtain more light. When plants grow close to one another, each plant may receive less water to make food. Growing further from one another allows young plants to obtain more water. Fruits have characteristics that help in the dispersal of seeds. This prevents overcrowding and increases the chances of survival for the seeds. Observe the fruits below. How are the seeds in these fruits dispersed? Special characteristics of fruits and seeds. Wing-like structure. How each special characteristic helps in seed dispersal. The wing-like structure allows fruits or seeds to be carried away from the parent plant by the wind. Method of dispersal. Wind. Special characteristics of fruits and seeds. Dry pod. How each special characteristic helps in seed dispersal. The pods of fruits dry out and split open when ripe, allowing the seeds to be dispersed. Method of dispersal. Splitting. Special characteristics of fruits and seeds. Fibrous husk. How each special characteristic helps in seed dispersal. The fibrous husk traps air to enable fruits to float on water. Method of dispersal. Water. Special characteristics of fruits and seeds. Hook-like structure. How each special characteristic helps in seed dispersal. The hook-like structures of fruits or seeds enable them to be attached easily on animals. Method of dispersal. Animals. Special characteristics of fruits and seeds. Juicy flesh. How each special characteristic helps in seed dispersal. The juicy flesh of fruits attracts animals to eat the fleshy parts and disperse the seeds in their droppings. Method of dispersal. Animals. Fruits and seeds have characteristics that allow them to be dispersed away from their parent plant. This fruit is light and has a wing. Method of dispersal. Wind. The light seed and wing suggests wind dispersal. This seed is small and has soft, fluffy hair. Method of dispersal. Wind. Look at the fruit given in the picture below. What is the method of dispersal of the fruit? Water. This fruit has a layer of fibrous husk that traps air, enabling it to float. Method of fruit dispersal. Water. This fruit is dry and has a line along the center that divides it into two halves. Method of dispersal. Splitting. Observe fruit T below. How are the seeds of fruit T dispersed? The seeds of fruit T are dispersed by animals. Seeds dispersed by animals are usually brightly colored and have juicy flesh. This attracts animals to feed on them and disperse the seeds in their droppings. Fruit T is brightly colored and has juicy flesh. It is dispersed by animals. The four methods of fruit/seed dispersal are animals, water, wind, and splitting. Fruits can be dispersed by wind, water, animals, or explosive action. Another term for explosive action is splitting. Study the photograph, which shows part of a mangrove tree. What features do the parts of the mangrove tree, circled in red, have that enable the tree to reproduce in the coastal environment? A and D. They are buoyant and they start germinating before they fall off the tree. The photograph shows the fruits of a mangrove tree that have sprouted into seedlings while still remaining attached to the tree. As they are dispersed by water, the fruits are indeed able to float and be carried away by tides and currents to other locations where they can grow into new trees. In addition, they start germinating even before they have fallen off the tree, so that the young seedlings can take root and grow as soon as they land on the soil surface. This increases the seedlings' chances of surviving and developing into new trees. However, they are neither colorful nor strong-smelling to attract animals to eat them, as they do not rely on animals for dispersal. The fruit of plant has many small seeds, but the fruit of plant B has only one big seed, as shown below. Which two of the following statements are correct about plant A and plant B? Both plants reproduce by seeds. Plants A and B have seeds to reproduce to ensure continuity of their own kind. The flower of plant has more ovules than plant B. Fertilization occurs when a male reproductive cell fuses with an egg cell in an ovule. After fertilization, the ovules develop into seeds, while the ovary develops into a fruit. For flowering plants to reproduce, their seeds need to be scattered and dispersed. A physical characteristic / feature that helps in the dispersal of fruits and seeds of a plant is a type of structural adaptation. Fruits can be scattered by wind, water, animals, or splitting / explosive action. Andy wanted to investigate the conditions for seed germination. He placed identical seeds into containers at room temperature, as shown below. Choose two setups where the seeds would most likely germinate. Seeds need oxygen, warmth, and water to germinate. Light is not needed for germination. Seeds need oxygen, warmth, and water to germinate. For germination to take place, the seeds will need air, oxygen, water, and warmth. The difference between the boxes made of wood and glass is that light can pass through glass, but not wood. However, light is not needed for the seeds to germinate. What are the three conditions required for germination? Air, water, warmth. Which of the following is the first sign of germination? The seed absorbs water and swells. The description of different phases in germination. The root emerges from the seed. The shoot emerges from the seed. The seed leaf becomes smaller. The first leaves develop. A seed requires 3 conditions for germination. The conditions are water, air, oxygen, and warmth, temperature.
Sonia prepared 4 setups, W, X, Y and Z, to find out if water is needed for seeds to germinate. Which 2 setups should she use to conduct a fair test? Setups W and Y. In a fair test, one variable is changed while the other variables are kept constant. As Sonia wanted to find out if water is needed for germination, she should use one setup with dry cotton wool and another with moist cotton wool. She should keep all the other variables constant. The aim is to find out if water is needed for seeds to germinate. The measured variable is that if the seeds germinate. The change variable between the 2 setups should be the presence or absence of water. Setup W and Y has all other variables kept constant, except for the dry and moist cotton wool. This difference tells us that setup W has no water available to the seeds but setup Y has water available to the seeds. Thus, the changed variable between set W and Y is the presence of water, which is the changed variable one needs to answer Sonia's aim. Gopal set up an experiment to find out if light is needed for seed germination. He placed 3 seeds each into containers A and B at the same appropriate temperature. Container A is placed in a black box while container B is placed in a clear glass box. A. In which containers will the seeds germinate? Explain your answer. The seeds will germinate in both containers as both container A and container B have water, air, oxygen and warmth that supports germination. B. Gopal then measured the mass of the seed leaves as the seeds germinate. The graph below shows how the mass of the seed leaves changes with time. Which graph, P or Q, shows how the mass of seed leaves change with time during germination? Explain your answer. Graph Q. As the seedlings uses or consumes the food stored in the seed leaves to grow, the amount or mass of food storage left in the seed leaves decreases as shown in graph Q.
A group of botanists studied 2 species of plants Y and Z growing on a plot of land. The plot of land below shows the distribution of plant Y and Z after a few months. A. State one characteristic of the fruit from plant Z. Waterproof covering or fibrous husk. B. What is the disadvantage of the dispersal method of plant Y as compared to plant Z? Explain your answer. There would be overcrowding. The young plants would be close to the parent plants. The young of plant Y will have to compete for space, nutrients, water with its parent's plant. Roy wanted to investigate the effect of temperature on the splitting of a pea fruit. He gathered 4 identical pea fruits A, B, C and D and subjected them to different temperature. He recorded the results in the table below. A. Which pea fruit A, B, C or D split with the greatest force? Give a reason for your answer. Pea fruit D. The seeds were dispersed or found furthest away from the parent plant. B. Based on the results above, what effect does temperature have on the time taken for the pea fruit to split open? The higher the temperature, the shorter time taken by the pea fruit to split open. Mrs. Lee grew rice plants in her garden. Her daughter, Maria, wanted to find out what would happen if she removed all the male flowers A from the rice plants. The female flowers B on the rice plants developed into rice despite the absence of the male flowers. Maria explained that the female flowers B might have been pollinated from the male flowers of the same plants before they were removed. What is another possible reason for the female flowers B to develop into rice? The wind carries the pollen grains from the male flowers of other rice plants which land on the stigma of the female flowers and thus fertilizing the ovules. Sally conducted an experiment to find out the relationship between the temperature of the surrounding and the distance the seeds were scattered from the parent plant on 3 identical fruits Q, R and S. She recorded her findings in the table below. A. State the relationship between the temperature of the surroundings and the distance. Seeds were scattered from the parent plant. The higher the temperature of the surroundings, the longer the distance the seeds were scattered from the parent plant.
Sally found some edible fruits. She noted that when the temperature of the surrounding is high, the birds passed out lesser droppings. B. How would the temperature of the surroundings affect the rate of reproduction of the fruits? Explain your answer. The higher the temperature of the surroundings, the slower the rate of reproduction of the fruits. The birds will pass out lesser droppings, thus fewer seeds, from the fruits, would be scattered away from the parent plants. The male parts of the flower are filament and anther. Together they form the stamen. The female parts of the flower are style, ovary, ovules and stigma. Together they form the pistil. Describe the male and female reproductive parts of a flower. The stamen is the male reproductive part of the flower. It consists of an anther and a filament. The anther produces pollen grains, while the filament holds the anther in a suitable position to disperse the pollen grains. The carpel is the female reproductive part of the flower. It consists of an ovary, a style and 1 or more stigmas. The ovary produces and protects the ovules and the stigma receives pollen grains. The style connects them together. Living things go through a life cycle to reproduce themselves. The 4 life processes that flowering plants go through to complete the cycle.
Fertilization to dispersal, to germination, to pollination, to fertilization.
Which of the following images below show the dispersal pattern of the seeds of plant D? Seeds of plant D has hair-like structures. This allows it to be easily carried away from the parent plant by the wind. This dispersal pattern shows the seeds dispersed in the direction of wind. This is characteristic of seeds dispersed by wind.
Dylan saw only one tree, growing on an island, when he went sailing one day. The seed that grew into the tree was least likely to be dispersed by splitting action. Forganas wanted to produce a fruit from flower K by using flowers K and L. The Forganas suggested what they should do before pollination takes place. Gardener A. Remove all the anthers from flowers K and L. Gardener B. remove the stigma from flower K and all the anthers from flower L. Ghana C. Remove all the anthers from flower K and the stigma from flower L. Ghana D. Remove the stigmas from flowers K and L. Which Ghana has a suggestion that will work? Ghana C. Remove all the anthers from flower K and the stigma from flower L. The diagram below shows how bird X helps a plant to disperse the seeds of plant Y. Explain how seed dispersal helps the population of plant Y to increase. Seed dispersal reduces the competition among the plants for light, nutrients, space, and water. This increases the chances of new young plant Y surviving and reproducing, thus increasing their population. B. Seeds of plant Y have a hard covering to allow them to be dispersed by the bird. Give a reason to explain why. The hard covering prevents the seeds from being digested in the body of the bird. C. What is the advantage of seeds growing in the waste of animals? The waste of animals can provide nutrients for the young plants that develop from the seeds to grow. The diagram shows 3 different flowers, A, B, and C. They are not drawn to scale. Michelle observed the flower. It has a faint scent, large petals, and the reproductive parts enclosed within the petals. Which of the flowers matches the description of the one that she observed? Explanation. Only flowers B and C have their reproductive parts enclosed within the petals. The diagram shows the fruit of a plant as it grows into a seedling. Structure R provides the seedling with food before structure P develops fully. Identify structure R. Correct answer: seed leaf. Explanation. Since structure R provides the seedling with food before structure P, shoot, develops fully when it has leaves and able to make its own food, we can deduce that structure R is the seed leaves. Which of the following correctly describes the changes to a flower after the processes of pollination and fertilization are completed? The ovary will enlarge and become a fruit. The petals will wilt and drop off. Explanation. After pollination and fertilization, the petals of the flower will wilt and drop off, and the ovary will enlarge and become a fruit. The diagram below shows 2 fruits, Y and Z, both with seeds from a pod. The seeds of fruits Y are hard and round, while the seeds of fruit Z are light and have wing-like structures. Based on the information provided, which of the following statements is/are true? Both fruits Y and Z disperse their seeds by explosive action. The seeds of fruit Y will be found at a nearer distance away from the parent plant than that of fruit Z, as the seeds of fruit Z will be dispersed by wind as well. There is insufficient evidence, not conclusive, for us to tell if fruit Y produces more seeds than fruit Z. The seeds of fruit Z will land further away from the parent plant in the direction of the wind. Refer to the diagram below. Which of the following statements about fruits X and Y is/are true? The dispersal of the seeds of both fruits X and Y are different. The seeds of fruit X are dispersed after the animals eat the fruit, while the seeds of fruit Y are dispersed after the seeds passed out from the animals' bodies as waste. Both the seeds of fruits X and Y cannot be digested by the digestive system. The sweet and juicy flesh of fruits X and Y will attract animals to eat the fruits. No information is provided in the question if the seeds of fruits X or Y can float on water. Thus, we cannot make a conclusion on the seeds of fruit X can float on water. The diagram shows two flowers, A and B, with both male and female reproductive parts. Which of the following correctly states the differences in the physical characteristics of the two flowers that you would be able to observe? The stigma and anther of flower B, unlike flower A, are hanging out of the flower. Flower B, unlike flower A, has a feathery stigma. Explanation. Flower A, unlike flower B, has nectar. This is not a physical characteristic that we can observe with our naked eyes. Both flowers A and B have petals. Study the diagram below. Select the processes that is/are occurring at X. Fertilization and pollination. Explanation. S represents fruit. A flower will undergo pollination and fertilization to become a fruit.
Refer to the diagram below. Which of the following statements about fruits X and Y is/are true? Both fruits X and Y are dispersed by animals. Only the seeds of fruit X do not get digested in the animal's digestive system. Explanation. The seeds of fruit Y does not have wing-like structure. Thus, the strength of the wind does not affect the distance the seeds get carried away from the parent plant. Both the seeds of fruits X and Y are carried by animals. Thus, we are unable to conclude the seeds of which fruit would be carried further away from the parent plant. Dawn discovered a plant in her garden that bore brightly colored flowers, pollinated by insects. To explore the impact of petal removal on the reproductive process, she chose to remove the petals from the flowers upon blooming. What might be the anticipated effects on the quantity of fruits produced by the plant as a result of this intervention? It may hinder insect pollination, leading to a reduction in the number of fruits produced. Explanation. The function of petals is to attract pollinators. If the petals were removed, pollinators are less likely to be attracted to the flowers, leading to a decrease in the number of flowers being pollinated and fertilized. Thus, the number of fruits produced will decrease.
Melvin carried out an experiment to observe a germinating seed as shown below. There's part R, S, and T. He recorded the mass of the seed leaves and the shoot of the seedling in the table below. Now, when you have questions on tables, you must first look at the data and you must look at for trends. Okay, trends can be increasing, decreasing, or it remains the same. Okay, so looking at results X, you can see that the trend is decreasing because from 25 grams to 20 to 15 and so on. Okay, for Y, you can see that it's increasing because from 5, 6 to 9 grams. Okay, now let's look at the question. Okay, which results X or Y shows how the mass of the seed leaf changed during the experiment. Give a reason for your answer. Okay, so the key point is we need to identify what is it that we want. So in this case, we want to find out which one shows is the seed leaves. Okay, so but before we can answer this question, we need to ask ourselves what is the function of the seed leaves. Okay, so the function of seed leaves is stored food used by the seed for it to germinate. Now, one question to ponder is whether, will the amount of stored food increase or decrease over time? As we saw from the previous slide, that the question to ponder was whether the stored food will decrease or increase over time. And since we know that the function of the seed leaves is for it to be used by the seeds to germinate, naturally the food should decrease over time. Therefore, result X should be the seed leaf. The mass of the seed leaves decreases because the stored food is being used up by the seedlings. Now let's look at the next part B. Okay. Before we can answer each of these statements, we need to first be able to identify the parts of the plant. Okay, so part T is the roots, part S is the seed leaves, part R are the leaves. Okay, so T grows downwards to take in nutrients only. Okay, that is false because roots take in water and nutrients. Okay, food is provided by S before R appears. Okay, that is correct because seed leaves stored food that provides food for the seeds to germinate. Okay, based on the table above, the seedlings can make its own food after day 8. Okay, looking at the table, after day 8, you can see that the mass of X does not increase after day 8. That means the plant is no longer using the stored food for the seed leaves and is already photosynthesizing, thus is able to get its food from other sources. So therefore, the answer is true. Okay. The cells in part S will have chloroplasts to make food. Okay. Part S is the seed leaves. It does not make food. It provides food. Okay. Only leaves have chloroplasts. Therefore, this statement is false. Now let's look at question 12. The diagram below shows the cross-section of two flowers, A and B. Okay, so we're supposed to name the part X and Y of flower B. Okay, one thing we need to take note of flowers, that each flower has one stigma, but they can have many anthers. Okay, so X will be the stigma, Y will be the anther. Based on the diagram above, which flower is more likely to be cross-pollinated with another flower? Explain your answer. Before we can answer this question, we first need to ask ourselves, what is cross-pollination? Okay, cross-pollination is when the pollen grain is transferred from one plant to another plant. Okay, then next we need to think, are there any characteristics of the plant that will allow it to be cross-pollinated much easier? Okay, so what characteristic of the flower will allow the pollen grains from other plants to be transferred easily? Okay, as you can see from the diagram, flower B, the stigma is higher than the anther, so it's more likely that the pollen grains from a different flower can be transferred to the stigma.
Question 13. The diagram below shows the female reproductive organ. From the diagram, we see that the ovary is labeled on the diagram. We have two ovaries in the diagram above. We have the fallopian tubes over here as well as the uterus. So question part A, they ask, what is the function of the uterus or the womb? For the function of the uterus, the womb, we have this as a question that requires you to remember some facts over here. So the function of the uterus is where the fertilized egg will be, and it develops and grow until it is ready for the baby to be born. Now let's move on to question 13b. The diagram below shows the female reproductive organ of a flower. So in the diagram, it shows us a flower with the ovary label. So part B, they want us to state one difference and one similarity between the fertilization of the human egg and the ovule of the flower. Now, one difference that we can state about the fertilization of the egg in the plant and human will be the location whereby the fertilization process happens. So the difference is the human egg is fertilized in the fallopian tube, while the plant egg is fertilized in the ovary. Now from this diagram, you can see that the plant egg is found inside over here in the ovule. So fertilization will take place inside the ovary, in the ovule itself. As for the human egg, the ovary releases the human egg into the fallopian tube. So it is where at the fallopian tube, fertilization of the human egg will happen. Next, let us answer the one similarity between the fertilization of the eggs for the human and the flower. One similarity that we can state is that both of the fertilization of the human egg and the ovule of the flower both involve the fusion, the joining of the male and female reproductive cells. So for the human side, we have the egg joining with the sperm, and for the flower side, we have the ovule joining with the male reproductive cells from the pollen grain. Question 14. In the diagram below, draw an arrow to show how pollination takes place between two flowers of the same species. In order to show pollination using the arrow, we got to understand what does pollination means. Pollination refers to the transfer of pollen grain from the anther to the stigma of the flower. However, in this case, they want us to draw the arrow between two flowers. So two flowers over here, I must draw the arrow from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower to show pollination between the two flowers. So I have over here the first flower with one stigma and four anther. Second flower, the stigma over here with the four anther. So I pick one anther from the first flower and draw an arrow to the stigma of the second flower. So this will be our answer. There are other possible answers as long as you show that the arrow points from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower. And for 14a, they want us to name the process that takes place after pollination. So we learned that the 4 main stages within the life cycle of a plant involves pollination, fertilization, dispersal of the seeds, as well as germination of the seeds. So after pollination will be the process of fertilization. So the answer will be fertilization. Let us now look at question 14b. 14b says, based on your observations of the flowers above, name one of its agents of pollination. That means what helps it to pollinate its pollen grain, as well as carry the pollen grain to the flower itself. So as we see that it has large petals, it will be the agent of pollination will be by animals or insects. And they want us to state one characteristic of the flower that supports our answer that it is by animal or insect dispersal. So as what we have mentioned previously, the large and colorful petals of the flower will help to attract the animal or insect to act as its agent of pollination.
Question 15. Study the flowchart below showing 2 processes that take place during plant reproduction. So let us recall the processes of flowering plant. First, pollination, followed by fertilization, followed by dispersal, followed by germination, and the process repeat. So looking at this question, there is pollination. The next process will be fertilization. So during pollination, it is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the flower. Pollen grain will grow a pollen tube down to the ovary and then to the ovule, where the male reproductive cell in the pollen grain which fuses with the female reproductive cells in the ovule. So this is the process for fertilization. Part A, identify process B, state what happens during this process. So based on the explanation, process B is fertilization. The second part of the question is to state what happens during this process, which is fertilization. What happens during fertilization? So during fertilization, the male sex cell fuses with the female sex cell. Another way to call male reproductive cell is actually male sex cell. And for female reproductive cell, another way to call it is female sex cell. Part B, in the table below, fill in the correct flower parts matching the changes that take place after process B. So process B that we identified just now was fertilization. So after fertilization, what changes does it occur? So before we even go into that, we need to know the parts of a flower. So what are the parts of the flower? Petals, style, stigma, anther, filament, ovule, ovary. So after fertilization, the petals will wilted and fall off. So this is the first part of the answer. Petal falls off. So after petal falls off, what becomes the fruit? Which part of the flowers becomes the fruit? Is actually ovary. Ovary becomes the fruit. And then ovule becomes the seed of the fruit. For part C, list 2 characteristics that help flowers to attract insects for pollination. So you have to tell me 2 ways flower has to appear to attract the insect for pollination. So the first one, the flower has to have colorful petals. So colorful petals of the flowers attract the insects. Then the second way would be the smell. So what kind of smell? Sweet scent that the flower gives off attract the insect. So where does this sweet scent or sweet smell or sweet aroma that we can call it for comes from? It's actually from the nectar of the flower. Question A. Which set of the readings 1, 2, 3, or 4 is most likely correct, explain your answer. So looking at the readings from the table and the explanation just now that we talk about wing-like structure of fruit A, it actually slows down as it's falling. So based on the table, the reading 3 is most likely the correct answer, as it shows that fruit A takes a longer time to reach the ground than fruit B. So by looking at this table, we can select reading 3, whereby fruit A has a larger either exposed surface area than fruit B, thus stay in the air longer, or a larger wing-like structure. So both answers are acceptable. Lara found another fruit and made her observations as shown below. So based on your observation of Lara's drawing, how is the fruit shown above dispersed? Give a reason for your answer. So by looking at the drawing, I can see that there is actually hooks or stiff hair on the fruit. And then when we need to think about dispersal, we're talking about the methods of dispersal. There's actually 4 methods of dispersal. So number 1, by animal, by wind, by water, or by splitting or explosive actions. So looking at this particular drawing, it seems that the particular fruit has hooks and it will attach onto the animal's body or animal's fur or human's clothes, and this helps the fruit to disperse more easily. From the explanation, the fruit is dispersed by animal, so the fruit has hooks or stiff hairs that enables it to hook or attach itself to the fur of the animals so that it can be dispersed further away.
Let us look at question 17. The diagram below shows the fruits A, B, and C. For fruit A, we see that it has hooks on its fruit itself. So most likely this fruit A is dispersed by animals as it has hooks to grip onto the body of the animals. As for fruit B, we see that it has wing-like structure, so most likely it is by wind dispersal. And for fruit C, the fruit pod splits open when it's ripe, so most likely it is by splitting action. So for fruits A, B, and C, the dispersal patterns of these 3 fruits are shown below. So these patterns over here, X, Y, and Z, they show how the fruits A, B, and C may be dispersed, either by pattern X, pattern Y, or pattern Z method. So for dispersal pattern X, we see that the seeds can be carried anywhere around the parent plant. So the bigger dot here, right in the middle, this is the parent plant. And we have the smaller dots all around the parent plant. These are the seedlings, the seeds. Okay? So for dispersal pattern X, we see that the seeds can be carried around anywhere. So based on fruit A, B, and C, A is by animal dispersal method, B is by wind dispersal, and C is by splitting action. So dispersal pattern X most likely is the dispersal pattern of fruit A, whereby it is animal dispersal method, because the seeds can be carried around anywhere where the animal goes to be dispersed. As for dispersal pattern Y, we see that the young seedlings are all scattered near to the parent plant. So this method of dispersal, whereby the seeds are scattered nearby to parent plant, most likely is by splitting action, which is fruit C. Because by splitting action, the distance whereby the seedling are from the parent plant is usually quite close. As for dispersal pattern Z, we see that the seeds are carried away all in one direction, in the direction of the wind. So the wind blows in this direction, the seedlings will be carried in this direction. So dispersal pattern Z most likely is carried by wind, so wind dispersal will be under fruit B. So fruit A, dispersal pattern X, fruit B, dispersal pattern Z, fruit C, dispersal pattern Y. So part A, they want us to match the fruits to the correct dispersal method. So from here we see dispersal pattern X will be fruit A. Dispersal pattern Y will be fruit C. And dispersal pattern Z will be fruit B. And for part B, they want us to describe two characteristics, two features of the fruit that has the dispersal pattern similar to dispersal pattern Z. So dispersal pattern Z, the seeds are all scattered in one direction, carried in one direction. So we see that it is by wind dispersal method. So for wind dispersal method, it is by fruit B. And from the fruit B diagram, we see that fruit B has the characteristic of wing-like structure. So one of the answer we can write here as what structure? Wing-like structure. And usually for fruits that is carried by wind, they are usually light, so that they can be easily carried by the wind to a distance far away from the parent plant. Let's look at question 18. The diagram below shows a shora fruit. And from the diagram, we see that the shora fruit has wing-like structures. Serene conducted an experiment to find out. Now, whenever the question has the phrase to find out, they are trying to tell us what comes after is the aim of the experiment. So they are trying to find out if the wing-like structures of a shora fruit affect the time it takes for the fruit to fall to the ground. So this is the aim of the experiment, whether the wing-like structures will affect the time it takes for the fruit to fall to the ground. So she dropped the shora fruit from a given height and recorded the time that it stayed in the air. So by recording the time that it stayed in the air, they can find out the time that it takes for the fruit to fall to the ground. So Serene removed the wing-like structures of the fruit before dropping it from the same height. Now, we see that the change variable over here is whether the fruit has wing-like structure or it does not have wing-like structure. And for the measured variable, they are looking at the time that it stayed in the air. How long does the fruit stay in the air? That is the measured variable. And this table shows the result of Serene's experiment. So the shora fruit with wing-like structure, we can see that for the first and second drop, the time taken for the shora fruit to fall to the ground is longer time taken as compared to when the fruit has its wing-like structure removed. The time taken for the shora fruit to fall to the ground is so much shorter. So part A, they ask, based on the results, so we must look at the data to derive a conclusion. Based on the results in the table above, what could Serene conclude about the wing-like structures of the shora fruit? So with or without wing-like structure, how does it affect the time taken for the shora fruit to fall to the ground? So with the wing-like structure, the shora fruit will take longer time to fall to the ground, meaning that with the wing-like structure, it allows the shora fruit to stay in the air for a longer period of time. Let us move on to part B of question 18. Part B wants us to explain the importance of the wing-like structures of the shora fruit to the dispersal of the shora seeds. They want us to explain how important is this wing-like structure to help the shora seeds in its dispersal method. So for this question, we got to mention that having the wing-like structure, it allows the shora fruit to be scattered further away from the parent plant. because they are able to stay in the air for a longer period of time. That is why they are able to be scattered further away from the parent plant by traveling a further distance. And how is it important? Why is this being scattered away important? Because it allows the Shora plant to reduce the chance of overcrowding by being scattered further away. So for this question, we have explained the importance of the wing-like structure to the dispersal of the Shora seeds.
Refer to the diagram below. Which of the following statements about fruits X and Y are true? The seeds of fruit Y does not have wing-like structure. Thus, the strength of the wind does not affect the distance the seeds get carried away from the parent plant. Both fruits X and Y are dispersed by animals. Both the seeds of fruits X and Y are carried by animals. Thus, we are unable to conclude the seeds of which fruit would be carried further away from the parent plant. Only the seeds of fruit X do not get digested in the animal's digestive system.
The diagram below shows different parts of flower K. If the black dots in the diagram below represent pollen grains from flower K, which of the following flowers have been successfully pollinated? A and C only. The arrows in each of the following diagrams show the transfer of pollen grains between 4 pairs of flowers, A, B, C and D. Which pairs of flowers would most likely develop into fruits? A only. The diagram shows some pollen grains on a stigma. The following statements are true about what will occur after pollination. The pollen will travel down the pollen tube. A pollen tube will grow through the style to reach the ovules. Fertilization will occur when the female reproductive cell fuses with the male reproductive cell. The diagrams below show the reproduction processes in 2 organisms, X and Y. The following statements are true. After fertilization, the ovule in organism Y will develop into a seed. The nucleus of the sperm cell fuses with the nucleus of the egg cell for fertilization to take place in organism X. Both organisms X and Y reproduce sexually. The seeds of fruit A and B are dispersed through the splitting action of the fruits. The mass of a seed of each fruit was recorded in a table. It is observed that seeds of fruit B are dispersed further from their parent plants than seeds of fruit A. The following are likely reasons for the observation. Seeds of fruit B are lighter than seeds of fruit A. Seeds of fruit B have a wing-like structure, while seeds of fruit do not. The mass of a seed of fruit is approximately 10 times the mass of a seed of fruit B. The wing-like structure of seeds of fruit B helps them stay in the air longer. Peter looked into a drain and found a plant growing on the side of the drain. He took a closer look and saw dust, like particles, on the underside of the leaves. It did not have any flowers. Based on the information, how do you think the plant reproduces? The plant reproduces by spores. B. Explain how the plant ended up growing in the drain. The spores get dispersed by the wind where the conditions are suitable for the plant to grow. Linda planted 3 different seeds into 3 identical containers of soil. Each container contained equal amounts of moist soil. She sprayed an equal amount of water onto the soil daily. She recorded the number of days taken for the shoot of each seed to first appear from the soil. A. Based on the given information, what is the aim of Linda's experiment? To find out which seed took the shortest time to germinate. B. Put a tick to show how Linda should conduct the experiment. Variable. Height of seedlings. Measured. Variable. Number of seeds A. Kept constant. Variable. Amount of water. Kept constant. Variable. Amount of light. Changed. Rita counted the numbers of 2 different types of young plants, X and Y, at various distances from their parent plants in an open field. Plant Y bears fruits that do not have hooks and are poisonous to animals. The results are shown in the graph. A. Based on the results above, what are the likely dispersal methods of plants X and Y? Plant X, splitting. Plant Y, wind. B. Identify 2 characteristics of the fruits/seeds of plant Y. The fruit or seed has a wing-like structure and is light. Tom wanted to investigate the dispersal of dandelion seeds. He placed a dandelion seed head in front of a moving fan. The dandelion seeds float away from the seed head before landing at different distances. Tom recorded the distance traveled by the seeds and the number of seeds found at those distances. What is the relationship between the distance traveled by the seeds and the number of seeds found at those distances? As the distance traveled by the seeds increases to 80 m, the number of seeds found increases. As the distance traveled by the seeds increased beyond 80 m, the number of seeds found decreases.
Ming Li conducted an experiment to investigate the conditions needed for the germination of seeds. She placed 6 seeds on the damp cotton wool for each setup as shown below. The setups were left at room temperature. A. In which setup, S, would the seeds germinate? setups A, C and D? B. What are the conditions needed for the seeds to germinate? The conditions needed are water, air, and warmth. C. During germination, where does the baby plant get its energy from? From the food stored in the seed leaves. Mary conducted an experiment in a garden using identical paper discs. She wanted to find out if bees are attracted to the nectar of flowers. She added 5 red paper petals and 4 drops of honey to the paper disc in setup A. She then released some bees to both setups. After a few minutes, she recorded the number of bees that had landed on each paper disc. A. Her teacher said the experiment was unfair. Explain why. There are 2 change variables in the experiment as she added the 5 red petals and 4 drops of honey to setup A. B. Suggest a change she can make to one of the setups above to ensure a fair experiment. Remove all or 5 paper petals from setup A. Add identical 5 paper petals for setup B. Mary found 2 flowers, R and S, in the garden. C. Flower S is more likely to be pollinated by wind. Using information above, explain why. Anthers are hanging outside of the flowers so that the wind can carry the pollen grain away. Stigma is hanging outside of the flower so it can receive pollen grains that are carried by the wind. David made 2 paper airplanes, P and Q, with different wingspan. She released each airplane from the same height and location and recorded the results that's shown below. What is the relationship between the length of wingspan and the time taken for the airplane to reach the ground? As the length of wingspan increases, the time taken for the airplane to reach the ground increases. David found fruits X and Y in a garden. B. The young plant grown from seeds of fruit X is less likely to experience overcrowding. Explain why using the information above. The wingspan is longer and it can travel further away from the parent plant to prevent overcrowding. The diagram below shows the positions of the seedlings and parent plant of plants S and T. Fruits U and V belong to either plant S or plant T. C. Based on the size of the seeds, which fruit, U or V, belongs to plant S? Explain your answer. Fruit V. Seeds of fruit B are small and indigestible. Seeds of fruit V are more likely to be eaten by animals and passed out as droppings, dispersing them further away from the parent plant than fruit U.
A group of botanists studied 2 species of plants Y and Z growing on a plot of land. The plot of land below shows the distribution of plant Y and Z after a few months. State one characteristic of the fruit from plant Z. Plant Z has a fibrous husk, a waterproof covering. B. What is the disadvantage of the dispersal method of plant Y as compared to plant Z? Explain your answer. There would be overcrowding. The young of plant Y will have to compete for water, sunlight, minerals and nutrients with its parent plant. Mrs. Lee grew maize plants in her garden. Her daughter, Maria, wanted to find out what would happen if she removed all the male flowers from the tree plants. The female flowers on the tree plants develop into fruits despite the absence of the male flowers. Maria explained that the female flowers might have been pollinated from the male flowers of the same plants before they were removed. What is another possible reason for the female flowers to develop into fruits? The wind carries the pollen grains from the male flowers of other rice plants, which land on the stigma of the female flowers and thus fertilizing the ovule. Sally conducted an experiment to find out the relationship between the temperature of the surrounding and the distance the seeds were scattered from the parent plant on three identical fruits X, Y, and Z. She recorded her findings in the table below. State the relationship between the temperature of the surroundings and the distance seeds were scattered from the parent plant. As the temperature of the surroundings increases, the distance seeds were scattered from the parent plant increases. Sally found some edible berries. She noted that when the temperature of the surrounding is high, the birds passed out lesser droppings. B. How would the temperature of the surroundings affect the rate of reproduction of the berries? Explain your answer. As the temperature of the surroundings increases, the rate of reproduction of the berries decreases. The bird will pass out less droppings, thus fewer seeds will be scattered away from the parent plant.